On this edition of The American Veteran, hear how a former prisoner of war survived his ordeal and made it home. In tribute, we'll meet a decorated veteran of Vietnam, Army Special Forces Captain Clyde Sincere. Then we'll pay a visit to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington and speak to the Army veteran who conceived of it. Welcome to The American Veteran. I'm Jonathan Kopanger, a Navy veteran. Joining me is our active duty host, MC1 Jen Blake. Welcome, Jen. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your service as well. It was his 81st bombing mission over Vietnam. He wasn't supposed to be flying that day, and in 2 weeks, he would have been back on U.S. soil with his family. But on May 19, 1967, Captain Eugene "Red" McDaniel's life would change forever.
It was a major escalation in the Vietnam War. Captain "Red" McDaniel was headed for his target when his plane was hit. On fire and heading down, he and his navigator ejected. He landed, crushing 2 vertebrae in his back. He was paralyzed, but still able to make contact with aircraft overhead. As he lay in the jungle, he thought he would be rescued within the hour. But 26 hours later, the enemy came to get him.
They took me to the en route to Hanoi, which was about 2 days away, stopped at 2 camps to put me on exhibit, and the people would come in and look at me and throw rocks. And then I went to the Hanoi Hilton, where I went in, and I was kind of a relief to be there because I was moving in with friends who I'd known years before who were shot down before me. Well, I went through 2 weeks of initial torture and interrogation, tortured for military information, for which I can understand. But at the end of 2 weeks, I was allowed to take my first bath. And they took me into a place we called Heartbreak Hotel. I had a rusty pipe up, bent over, no shower head, and had a stool that I could sit on because I could not walk. And they sat me down for my first bath in 2 weeks in the tropics. And I looked straight ahead, and right at the eye level in front of me, somebody had written "Smile, you" on candid camera. And from that, I got a boost.
We knew that he had gotten out of a plane and that he had landed on the ground and that he had talked to the planes overhead. So we knew that he was probably alive and probably in a POW camp.
And I also remember being at a very young age, tell me the truth, don't sugarcoat it. I want to know what it is, if it's good, if it's bad, but tell me the truth. Don't give me a false hope.
For 3 silent years, the McDaniel family waited for news. Was Captain McDaniel dead or alive? They looked for answers wherever they could.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.
There was a lot of the anti-war movement. And many times when people would go over to Vietnam, go to Hanoi, they would visit, particularly those within the anti-war movement, would visit the prisoner of war camps. And they would come back with footage, pictures. And I would go down with my mom. We would go down to Naval Intelligence, and we would go through those photographs and the footage and try to find him in a crowd somewhere.
You forget the good life. And for me, I could concentrate on survival, realizing that I had a strong family back home. My wife, Dorothy, was waiting for me, would take care of the 3 children, so I could focus on survival, and that was what kept me alive. The one thing the enemy can't take, though, is the will to believe, your faith.
The years went by. The prisoners of war developed their own communications code, communicating 6 to 7 hours a day. Red kept everyone's hopes up.
I'm an optimistic person. The guys would tap down the wall, a little signal, and they would say, "Red, we're going to go home." And my goal was 2 months. Time and time again, 2 months. Well, in 6 years, I lost a lot of credibility, but that's what they wanted to hear. I'd been there 2 years, during torture, no sleep 7 days, 7 nights, beaten daily with a fan belt. And the body goes downhill very fast on half rations. So the only thing I had left was that will that says, hang on. I had nothing else left to give. And the lesson I learned is that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is simply the presence of faith.
After 3 years, the McDaniel family received word that Captain McDaniel was alive and was being held as a prisoner of war.
It was relief knowing that he was alive, or the last thing we heard, he was alive. But it was also it was harder because now we could visualize him in a POW camp rather than wonder if he was alive.
Another 3 years passed as the war went on. Then in 1973, after 6 years as a POW, a peace accord was negotiated, and McDaniel and others being held were released and going home.
They're loaded aboard the 141s, and you don't really get excited until you leave the coastline of Vietnam. And it's a term in the Navy, when we hit the beach, feet dry, we hit the water, feet wet. And when the C-141 went feet wet, there was a G jump in the aircraft. That's the first time we could really get excited about it. And we went to the Philippines, where we were met by thousands of people. And it's hard to explain the magnitude of the number of people that were there in the middle of the night to welcome us home, and we received a great homecoming.
I can remember seeing the plane land and then taxi down the tarmac. And you know your father's on this airplane. And there's this anticipation that's indescribable.
I was worried, what's it going to be like, having been gone for 7 years, a year of combat and 6 years of a POW.
After his return, Captain McDaniel resumed active duty. He eventually told his story in his book, Scars and Stripes, and he became active in trying to find those still missing in Vietnam. To this day, he credits his optimism and faith that helped him survive 6 brutal years as a POW for the man he is today.
I grew from my adversity in Vietnam. And I learned that when the storms come, you don't wait for the storm to pass. You learn how to dance in the rain. And that enabled me to survive, was being able to face the fact that any life has adversity.
Between August 4th, 1964 and January 27th, 1973, close to 9 million troops served in Vietnam. More than 58,000 of them never returned. It has now been 50 years since the onset of the war, and we'd like to mark the occasion by honoring the memory of all the men and women who served during this era. In tribute is the story of Army Special Forces Captain Clyde Sincere.
I always thought I was invincible and nothing would ever happen. But the first time I was wounded, I peed in my pants. I was scared, didn't think it could happen. I went out with the unit. There were some minor skirmishes. We captured some prisoners, and I elected to take them home back to Pleiku. But while I was back in Pleiku, the next morning my sergeant major came in and said, "Sir, the unit is being hit very heavy. You may want to go and check on it." The supply officer for the C team came running out. His name was Paul Hess, just a young first lieutenant. And he said, "Can I go with you?" He said, "I'll ride just for the ride." I said, "Sure." So he took his weapon and he jumped in next to the gunner. The gunner on the right side was a staff sergeant by the name of Leonard, and he was going home. His tour was over. He was leaving that day. So we flew back out to the dry lake bed on the Cambodian border where we had taken off the day before. All hell broke loose, and Leonard and Hess were killed immediately at 51 caliber. The lieutenant was wounded. The gunner on the other side went right through that soft-skinned Huey. And Al Cartwright turned and said, "Clyde, somebody's got to get out." He says, "We're going down." So I said, "I guess that means me," because he was flying. So I jumped out, and Hess's weapon fell out of the aircraft by that time on the ground, and I picked it up, and I started running towards the woods. And I said, "Whoops, wrong colored uniforms were coming out of that woods towards me." And they threw a grenade and got me in the chest and legs. And I laid there for a couple hours, bleeding profusely, scared and bloody. Basically, my guys by that time saw what was happening, came down, and to hear them talking was the sweetest words I had heard in a long time. And they got me back to our lines. And I would say that was probably the biggest fight of my life. We were moving down a hill, 709, and I remember that. And we got ambushed, and we got ambushed, and we got ambushed. One of my guys, Kurt Weissen, was wounded, caught a MAP 49, a French weapon. So when I went down, I fell into a pit. It was full of punji's steaks, and they were tipped with feces. I mean, that was a normal, and so that basically is what happened. But when I got to Weissen, he was alive, and he said, and he was a medic. He said, "Sir, I'm hurting," and he had been gut shot in that. And he said, "Well, give me a shot of morphine." Well, he's a medic. I was so nervous. I'm trying to punch that morphine into his leg. I didn't extract the little T-pin, and I was bleeding. So I did it, and put it in him, carried him back up the mountain. My other medic says, "Sir, you son of a bitch, you're never supposed to give a man with a sucking chest wound morphine." I said, "Now you two guys get your act in order. He's a medic, you're a medic." He says, "Give me a shot." You say, "Don't give him a shot." And he gave him another shot of something too. Thing that we tagged him that he had morphine in that and shipped him off. But I always remember, Kurt still loves me today. Every time he sees me, he says, "Sir, you saved my life." And I'm saying, boy, another guy said, "I'm gonna kill you." On the 30th of June of '68, Quezon closed. All Marine and Army elements, to include the 1st Air Cav, everybody left. We turned it over to Charlie, just walked away. We really ran away. I maintained, overlooking the Quezon, a radio relay site on top of a mountain, and I could look down on Quezon and all of its occupants that were now from North Vietnam. 99% of all missions were reconnaissance. If I recall, we lost 10 complete teams to this day that we never heard of again. When I retired, I was offered to take a VA physical. But I used the phrase that I was 192 pounds of rump and stomping airborne hell. I was in excellent shape. I didn't think my government owed me anything. I was proud to have served my country. But here, 31 years later, I'm a wreck. I made almost 1,000 jumps, 985. But my knees, my legs, it's taken its toll.
Anyone who has been to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington knows that many visitors leave tribute items behind, but what you may not know is that most of those items are collected each day and preserved. That's being done so that one day they can be returned to a new facility near the wall, exhibited for all to see.
Washington, D.C.'s Vietnam Veterans Memorial has become one of the most heavily visited monuments in our nation's capital. But it might not be here at all if it were not for the efforts of this man, Army veteran Jan Scruggs.
When I got out of high school, I went into the Army, volunteered for the draft for 2 years in the Vietnam War. It was pretty obvious that being a Vietnam veteran was not something to advertise sort of on your resume of life. So that sort of resonated with me, that this is the way we're viewed. I decided to build a national Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But a lot of great people got involved.
It was his concept, and started everything with his own seed money. Just put the money in, and he began, and this was 30 years ago, so things were done differently. He began pounding the halls of Congress, because it's on the National Mall. We had to get approval, congressional support.
The initial design for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was the Maya Lin design. She had the most brilliant design, because we said in the competition that we wanted this to be reflective and contemplative and horizontal, and she met all that. We got it built in record time. We started in 1979 and it was completed in 1982. How are you going to beat that? Our sort of credo was, look, we want to separate the war from the warrior. People can debate the wisdom of our foreign policy decisions, but they can't really debate whether their neighbor's kid who volunteered for 4 years in the Marine Corps did the right thing for his country. He did the right thing for his country, so let's honor the people who served.
People leave the most incredible mementos, tokens at the wall. People left them for a reason. It meant something to them.
I remember just after we'd put the panels up, and somebody snuck over the fence and placed a pair of cowboy boots, like about halfway down the east panel. It was like a spooky sort of thing to see. But within a week, there were hundreds and hundreds of items that had been left there.
We here have baby Huey. Never met you. Your niece and nephew are coming to the wall to kind of pay tribute to you. But
nothing unusual about finding an article like this.
No, this is from, between family members. Here is the wreckage of a B-52 from a mid-air collision in Vietnam. The number here that they wrote on is representative of the highest amount of casualties of any Catholic school in the United States. Here we have a baseball that was left at the wall.
There are approximately 400,000 objects that have been left at the wall thus far. In my view, it initially started out as very cathartic. People would sort of have an emotional something while they were there, and they would leave a spontaneous object. But over time, people started to create things to be left at the wall.
This is a model of a prisoner of war camp.
Many of the things that are left at the wall are folk art. They're created by the hands of the people that leave it. It's just like you're buying this stuff off the shelf. People create things to leave them at the wall. Everything that's left there has a meaning to someone.
Sitting in this box face up was this wallet-sized image of a North Vietnamese soldier and a little girl. There's also a letter that accompanies it, and the donor describes how he confronted this North Vietnamese soldier. They paused for a moment, but the American ended up taking his life, and for years he had carried this photograph. One of the major newspapers in Vietnam, they ran a copy of the photograph. That's the only photograph of their father they have.
So here is where we store all of the objects in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Collection, and we've been collecting since the wall opened, pretty much, since it was dedicated. So you can imagine the collection.
Is it organized by material or date or?
We have everything organized by date because we have such a variety of materials and objects that are left that it would be really difficult to sort them all by object type. This is a letter left to a gentleman on the wall called William Stocks, aka Spanky. And Spanky's mom has been coming to the wall and leaving things since our very first exception that we ever collected. And here we have a 6-pack of Schlitz left by Jeff. And I just love the idea of libations. This is something that people have been doing since people were people. It's a way to honor their dead and commemorate with them and celebrate those who have gone from this life. North Vietnamese regulars popped out of hiding and ambushed the whole formation, and one of the helicopters was shot down. This rotor blade is from that helicopter that was shot down. The crew chief came under such heavy fire that he immediately got back in their copter and ordered everyone to lift off, leaving Jerry behind. They've sent several helicopters over the next few days looking for Jerry, but no trace of him was ever found again. It's a reel-to-reel player and a box of reel-to-reel tapes that was left in 2012, so fairly recently. These are songs of the Vietnam War recorded while serving in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam.
About 20 years ago, this group of veterans brought this bike down to the wall, and it really speaks to all of us about the nature of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the conflict itself. The Vietnam conflict, the wall, is providing them a conduit to release whatever needed emotions they have to help with their healing process.
7, 8, 9. Here we go, this gentleman right here, Calvin Terrell.
Some people didn't like it. They thought it was, black's the color of shame, all the other monuments are white, and so there was this big argument. So we said, okay, we will have a traditional element with this unconventional memorial, which was the 3 servicemen statue, 1984. Once that was built, the women who served in Vietnam were very upset and said, well, we can't believe this. You don't have a Vietnam women's statue. And they pushed and got through Congress legislation to authorize that. That was built in 1993. And there's an Agent Orange in memory plaque. It's at the site. So these are the elements. The site is filled. So now the education centers can start appealing to these different groups.
The education center at the wall, or on our National Mall, is intended to be a capstone experience for your time on our National Mall.
Visitors will enter a place of civic reflection.
The basic mission will be to honor America's legacy of service from 1775, actually, which is when the U.S. Army formed itself to fight the British, all the way through to Iraq and Afghanistan. The primary focus of the exhibits will be a wall of faces and how we remember the fallen.
And give a face to the faceless.
Once every hour, for 5 minutes, we're going to show the photographs of the fallen. So that, with working with the other exhibits, this will become a place of reunion, and this is a place that all the veterans will go to.
We have a responsibility at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund to capture all of those tokens, mementos that are left at the wall. When we have the education center built, a collection of those will be on static display for all of the world to see.
Objects related to soldiers and the things they carried.
Our current situation, we are a 501c3. All of the programs and ceremonies, all of the maintenance, all of the anything else that we're doing, and the education center has to be from private funds.
Well, I like hanging around there when I get the chance. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. But the people who are like in one battle or something, I've met a lot of relatives and friends and neighbors who went there to do an etching. That's always the great sort of way to meet someone. When they're rubbing name, I ask, whose name are you rubbing? And then they sort of tell you the story. And I've met some of the great soldiers from the Vietnam War, some of the great soldiers in today's military as well. Once a year we put new names on it, and also in the country of Vietnam we have U.S. military personnel who actually try to find the remains of our soldiers. For most veterans it is a very cathartic experience. I'm not sure it closes their pain, ends their struggles, but cathartic experiences are important parts of our lives. So the emotion associated with seeing the names, getting some closure, by honoring somebody, maybe even leaving an item there, it's a very important and amazing part of the experience.
If you'd like to get in touch with us or obtain more information about benefits and services, call us at 1-800-827-1000 or visit our website, va.gov. And if you're a veteran who's troubled in some way, please call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. And that concludes this edition of The American Veteran. The Department of Veterans Affairs is honored to bring you this program.